Daniel Show. Keep listening, keep learning, the Tom Daniel Show.
You're listening to the Tom Daniel Show, and I'm your host, Tom Daniel. Today's episode begins with a question that sounds really simple, but it's not. What did the great European musicians and composers think of America? Now, at first glance, that sounds like a matter of opinion. I mean, did they like us? Did they respect us? Did they take our music seriously? But those aren't the right questions. Because before Europe could decide what it thought of American music, it had to decide whether American music even existed, or even if America itself existed. And for a long time, the answer to both was, not really. Now, at first, we were a country without a sound. Let's start with the obvious names, Mozart and Beethoven. I mean, the two biggest giants. They both lived during the birth of the United States. They were aware, at least abstractly, that something called America existed. But musically, there was really nothing for them to hear. No American symphonic tradition, no American conservatories, no American canon or repertoire. There's no evidence Mozart knew any American songs or had any formed opinion about American musical identity. He was aware of Americans in the abstract. Paris in the 1770s through 1780s included figures like Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson. But there's no indication that Mozart connected them to a distinct musical culture. For Mozart, music was still firmly a European inheritance. So when Mozart looked westward, he didn't see a musical culture. He just saw a place. And Beethoven definitely did not spend his evenings dreaming of relocating to Philadelphia. What he did admire was something more general. The idea of a people successfully pushing back against monarchy. Now, he really liked that. To Beethoven, the American Revolution wasn't a cultural event. It was strictly a political one. It was proof that resistance was possible. But the admiration of a political outcome is not the same thing as engagement with a culture. So in the late 1700s and early 1800s, America exists in the European imagination as nothing more than a political experiment without a cultural or musical identity. Now, by the time we reach Beethoven's later years in the 1820s, something begins to trickle across the Atlantic. Songs, folk melodies, some published collections, some fragments. Beethoven himself even arranged a number of these American folk tunes alongside Scottish and Irish tunes. But here's the key. He treated them as raw material only, not as a cultural expression, not as a living tradition, just melodies. And that tells you everything, because when you strip a song down to its melody alone, you've already made a decision that the only important thing is what can be written down. Everything else, the performance, the voice, the context, the people, get left behind and don't matter. Now, as the 19th century unfolds, Europeans begin to encounter America more directly. Travel increases and writers visit, musicians tour. And the consensus that begins to form is remarkably consistent. America is full of energy. America is loaded with ambition. America is not quite finished. To many Europeans, America was a place where a lot of things were happening, just not culture. Writers like Charles Dickens describe Americans as loud, restless, and commercially driven. Other writers like Alexis de Tocqueville describe a society that is vibrant, but not deeply rooted in tradition. Both Dickens and Tocqueville visited America and came away with different experiences. Tocqueville observed that Americans were intensely practical and future-oriented. American society was more equal socially than Europe, but less refined. American institutions mattered less than habits and customs, and American culture was less rooted in tradition and more in function. Now, for the most part, it was a fairly positive evaluation. But then there's Charles Dickens. Dickens was a lot more to the point. He hated America. He criticized loud, boastful public behavior and spitting. He writes about this constantly. He wrote about a fixation on money and commerce and weak copyright laws, which affected him personally. However, Dickens only visited large cities in the Northeast. If that's all he saw, I really can't argue with that perception. And European musicians touring America, following the same line of thought, tend to conclude that there is no distinctly American music yet. Not because nothing's happening, but because what is happening doesn't match what they recognize as culture. You're listening to The Tom Daniel Show, and we'll be right back.
The Tom Daniel Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniel Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniel Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniel Show.
Welcome back to the Tom Daniel Show, and I absolutely love that European art version of our theme song. Mary Mac is the world's most perfect band. And now we arrive at a turning point, and it doesn't come from one composer, but two. Two different composers visit America, looking and listening to the same thing, and draw different conclusions. First, Tchaikovsky. Many people don't even realize that Tchaikovsky visited the United States in 1891 for the opening of Carnegie Hall. It was 2 years before he died. He conducted, he traveled, he observed, and his reaction was courteous, but telling. He found American orchestras to be totally competent and capable, but not very spectacular. He found American audiences to be highly enthusiastic, but not very sophisticated. Most significantly, he did not find a distinctly American musical voice. To Tchaikovsky, America sounded like nothing more than Europe light. The structures were all imported, the repertoire was imported, the training was imported. And so his conclusion was not hostile or insulting, but it was clear. To Tchaikovsky, America was not yet a culture producing its own music. Just 1 year later, Czech composer Antonín Dvořák arrives. And here's something entirely different. Now, where Tchaikovsky hears imitation, Dvořák hears origin. He listens not to the concert hall, but to spirituals, to indigenous melodies, to the music carried outside the institutions. And Dvořák makes a claim that would have sounded almost absurd to many Europeans at the time. The future of American music is already here. Not in the symphony hall, not in the conservatory, but in the people that are already singing. But, and this is where the story gets complicated, Dvořák still processes what he hears through his own framework. He takes these elements, pentatonic shapes, modal colors, and builds them into a European symphonic form. So even in recognition, there's still translation. And that gives us one of the most revealing contrasts in this entire episode. Tchaikovsky listens for a culture that looks like Europe, but doesn't find it. Dvořák listens for a culture that doesn't look like Europe and realizes it's been there the whole time. However, remember how Charles Dickens hated America but only experienced America through the northeastern corridor of large cities? That's exactly what happened to Tchaikovsky. He only visited cities in the Northeast and came away unimpressed. Don't blame him. In contrast, Dvorak immersed himself in Southern folk music and spirituals and concluded, hey, there's something new here and it's foundational. Then in the early 20th century, something happens that Europe cannot ignore anymore. American music stops arriving as melody and starts arriving as rhythm. Ragtime, jazz, dance forms. And suddenly, European composers are confronted with something they have no frame of reference for. They've never heard anything like American rhythms before, and they don't fit neatly into their European framework. Claude Debussy hears it and is fascinated, but treats it partly as a novelty. In his view, American music is rhythmically very much alive, but also very unserious. Igor Stravinsky studies it, analyzes it, extracts its rhythmic ideas. He admired the precision, the energy, and the rhythmic asymmetry of American music, but did not embrace jazz as a cultural expression. He just simply treated it as resource material for his own modernist composition. But Maurice Ravel was different. Ravel encounters jazz directly and, to his credit, takes it seriously as a musical language. He traveled directly to Harlem to hear it for himself and composed music based on that trip. He met George Gershwin in America, and he treated jazz as serious music with its own integrity. The composer Darius Milhaud also hears jazz in Harlem and comes away deeply impressed like Ravel. His encounter was transformative, and he incorporated jazz idioms in his compositions as structural material and not as a novelty. But even here, a pattern remains. They absorb it, they admire it, they reshape it, and they place it inside structures they already understand. So what were they all actually perceiving? Across all these composers, a consistent pattern emerges. First, America was heard only as folk material. Early composers treated American music the way they treated Scottish or Irish tunes, raw, unrefined, and available for arrangement. And then second, American music was heard as exotic rhythm. With ragtime and early jazz, Europeans heard something genuinely new, syncopation, a swing feel, even if they didn't really understand it, timbre-driven ensembles playing. This was disruptive to European expectations. And then third, finally, America was heard as a serious musical language. By the 1920s, jazz forced recognition. It could no longer be dismissed as novelty. Now, here's the thread that ties all of this together. European composers were not wrong about what they heard here. They were just wrong about what they thought it was, because they were listening for what they were familiar with: written traditions, formal systems, institutional authority. And American music, especially Southern music, was operating somewhere else entirely, in churches, in kitchens, in fields, in community spaces where music was not preserved in books, but in people. So when Europeans said, "There is no American music yet," what they actually meant was, there is no American music that behaves like ours. Jazz is really what changed everything, because jazz cannot be reduced to melody alone. It resists transcription. It resists simplification. It resists being captured on the page at all. And that forces a shift. Now the question is no longer, does America have music, but what are we supposed to do with a musical system that's not like ours? Now, some European composers adapt, some admire, some misunderstand in more sophisticated ways, but none of them can ignore it anymore. So if we step back and look at the full arc, what do we see? European composers consistently separated two ideas, America as a concept and America as a culture. They admired the concept, freedom, newness, possibility, but they doubted the culture. It was too young, too informal, too unstructured. And the irony is that what they dismissed as lack of structure was just structure of a different kind. Not written down, not institutional, but human. So what did European composers really think of America? They thought it was promising. They thought it was unfinished. They thought it was energetic. They thought it was lacking something. And in a way, they were right. America was different, but not because we lacked culture, because we carried it differently. And once that difference becomes audible, once it arrived in forms that couldn't be ignored, the entire conversation changed. Not overnight, not cleanly, but permanently. This has been the Tom Daniels Show. Keep listening, keep learning.
Keep listening, keep learning. The Tom Daniels Show. Keep listening, keep learning. The Tom Daniels Show. Take a break from your usual routine and tune in to the Tom Daniels Show. You'll discover the world of melodies and stories that you might not know. Keep listening, keep learning. The Tom Daniels Show. Keep listening, keep learning. The Tom Daniels Show. The Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show.